Okay, hello everybody. Today's webinar is Rethinking Investments in Rural Infrastructure and Access in a Changing World. Today is August 1st, 2012. My name is Jessica Hemans. I'm the training coordinator here at the National Consumer Law Center. Our speakers today are Edyael Casaperalta, Center for Rural Strategies, Jason Whittet from Massachusetts Broadband Institute, Darlene Wong here at the National Consumer Law Center, and also John Van Alst, a staff attorney here at the National Consumer Law Center who's going to moderate. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple technical tips. If you could enter your PIN number into your phone, that would be helpful. It's pound, the number and the pound. You can find it in your audio tab. That's just for people who have called in. If you have joined with a microphone and headset, please be sure your device volume settings are properly adjusted. If you cannot hear correctly, try unplugging and replugging them in. Everybody is muted, and I'm recording the training. If you have any questions about what the speakers are talking about, type them in and we will relay it to the speakers. If you're having any technical problems, also type those in and I will assist you. At the end of the webinar, there is a short evaluation. It will pop up on your screen when you exit out. Please do that for us. And tomorrow, I'll email you with a link to our website where you can download the PowerPoint and the recording. Everybody will get a copy of this PowerPoint tomorrow. So again, if you have any questions, just type those in, and if you want to minimize your control panel, click the orange arrow. This webinar is part of a series of webinars with the National Consumer Law Center and the National Alliance for Rural Policy, NARP. We're doing a series of rural investment webinars. And at the end of this webinar, we'll talk to you about our next one. Our presenter today, the first one is Darlene Wong. She's a staff attorney at the National Consumer Law Center, focusing on low-income utility consumer issues. She has litigated rate and service quality cases involving issues of rate setting, consumer protection, engineering, and environmental concerns relating to telecommunications, water, gas, and electric companies. And she has also co-authored NCLC's manual, Access to Utility Service, and a contributing author to Collections, Actions, and Unfair and Deceptive Acts and Practices supplement. We also have Edyael Casaperalta. She joined Rural Strategies after serving as a consultant for their efforts in the Gulf Coast in the fall and winter of 2006-2007. She works at Rural Strategies and highlights the intersections between rural communities and telecommunications policy and advocates for policies that allow full rural participation in our nation's economy, culture, society, and democracy. In this capacity, she also coordinates the Rural Broadband Policy Group, a national coalition of rural advocates for fast, affordable, and reliable Internet service. We also have Jason Whittet. Since 2009, he has been the Deputy Director of the Massachusetts Broadband Institute, the broadband program created by our Governor, Deval Patrick, here in Massachusetts. In his role as Deputy Director, Jason spearheads the Institute's broadband adoption and last-mile efforts, and he is currently on the Board of Directors of the Rural Telecom Congress. So thank you so much to our speakers today. Darlene is going to go first, so I'm now going to make her the presenter. Hi, Darlene.
Hi, Jessica. So thanks, and we just wanted to welcome everyone joining us today. Thank you for your interest. And we wanted to find out a little bit about who is on the call with us. As you know, the subject today is telecommunications and broadband investment and funding to rural areas. So to that end, wondering who's on the call. We have 3 questions that we'd like to ask you in an interactive poll. Feel free to just point your mouse to the answer and click. The first question is, have you or your organization applied for federal, state, or other grant assistance for broadband deployment? A is yes or B is no, and I'll give you a minute to answer that question and we'll move on to the next.
Okay, Darlene, we had about 29% that said yes and 71% said no.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next question. For those folks who did answer yes, can you identify the nature of your work or organization? Are you working with a school or library, A, B, a private organization, C, a state or municipal agency or organization, D, a nonprofit, or E, other?
We'll give folks 10 more seconds to fill it out. Okay, we had 0% school or library, 4% private organization, 39% state municipal organization, 30% nonprofit, and 26% other.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to know who the others were, and unfortunately we didn't have room to include more choices, but let's go on to the next question and last one. What is the biggest obstacle you face, and this can apply to everyone, not just the folks who answered yes to the first question. What is the biggest obstacle you face in applying to federal or state funding programs for rural broadband deployment or service? A, you're not an eligible telecommunications carrier. B, you don't know how to apply, or you or your organization lack the technical capacity. C, you don't have the matching funds that may be required of applicants. D, there is another entity who already receives funding for your area. Or E, the application is cumbersome, or the obligations of receiving funding are too cumbersome. You could pick A through E, the one that best fits the biggest obstacle you face in applying for federal or state funding.
Okay, 10 more seconds. Okay, we had 38% for not eligible. We had 22% for lack knowledge technical capacity. We had 24% for no matching funds. We had 8% for another entity receives funding in this area, and 8% application obligations are too cumbersome.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jessica. So that gives us an idea of who's on the call. Thanks, everyone, for participating. And I think Edyael, who will be talking a little bit after my presentation, will touch on some of those concerns about applying for federal and state funding. So anyway, just wanted to launch right into it. Rethinking investments in rural infrastructure, what really is at stake? Why is this an important issue? First of all, as we all know, access to telecommunications service is important, and rural areas are no different than any other place. Today, individual economic success hinges on access to voice service and access to broadband internet. Whereas in the past, access to a canal, railroad, electricity, or highway was essential to an individual's economic success, now we all really just need to be connected. The other importance of access to rural areas is that traditionally rural areas have been more expensive to spend infrastructure costs to. For example, when you're in an urban area, traditional landline companies could serve 1 million people in an urban area with an amount of infrastructure, spread those costs over 1 million people. You get to a rural area, much smaller customer base, perhaps wider geography between each customer, larger infrastructure, more costs. It could end up being uneconomic from the utilities perspective in recovering its cost investments. And it could be prohibitively expensive to subscribers who would need to pay rates to support that infrastructure to a rural area. But access is important for public interest considerations. The value of the network increases with each user who's connected. If a rural customer cannot connect with someone in an urban environment or vice versa, the value of the network decreases to both users. So I think there's no dispute that affordable access is essential. And I would argue that when we look at essential utility service, we've traditionally characterized that as including telecommunications, water, gas, and electricity. But telecommunications and landline is really moving to a whole new era, and broadband and voice over broadband is part of that. I don't think there's any dispute that businesses and social communications take place over broadband now, with email and voice service job applications may be requested online. A lot of governments, such as municipalities, may be going paperless and asking consumers to get their information on the government entity's website. You may also want to engage in political actions over the internet. Utility notices, bank and financial statements are online now, and customer notices are online. Distance learning occurs online, and 77% of K through 12 teachers say that they or a fellow teacher at a school assigned homework requiring internet access. So children who are in our educational systems today need that online connection. Yet not all libraries or school labs are available at hours that are convenient to do homework, so it's really important to have that in-home connection, and rural areas may not have that. On top of that, public libraries have been experiencing successive years of budget cuts and reduced operating hours, which has coincided with an increase in usage and demand. So it's really extra important to have that home internet connection. And community economic development is stymied in areas without broadband service. UNESCO issued a report finding that for every 10% increase in broadband penetration within a country, there was a 1.3% additional growth in the gross domestic product that they attributed to that increase in broadband penetration. So what does rural broadband look like right now? Well, in the first quarter of 2012, rural areas were starting farther behind than other areas of the country. For example, 60% of rural broadband subscribers had a maximum downstream speed of 3 megabits per second, which was 1/8 of the peak U.S. downstream speed. The other thing to keep in mind is the federal subsidy used to be called the Universal Service Fund, which funded build-out of landline service throughout the nation to high-cost areas, high-cost-to-serve areas, including rural areas, has now been transformed to the Connect America Fund, which is focused on building out broadband to those same areas. Whereas the Universal Service Fund tended to be somewhat more of a more mandatory requirement, the Connect America Fund is asking companies to participate on a voluntary basis. At any rate, FCC has set 4 megabits per second downstream as the target speed, but 71% of rural subscribers now receive speeds that are slower than that. And copper, which is more prevalent in rural areas, is slower than, for example, fiber, which does not tend to be in those areas and maybe in more urban areas. The next slide I have is a chart just showing you an example of the breakdown of peak rural broadband speeds. As you can see, the majority of customers are experiencing speeds at just at or under the FCC's very modest goal of 4 megabits per second. I would mention that currently just DSL service can range from 1.5 to 15 megabits per second download. And FiOS or fiber optic internet can get up to 300 megabits per second. Cable internet can go up to 25 to 100 megabits per second. So that 4 is really, really modest. And look at how many people are below that. There's a very small minority of people who are above that number. So access to broadband nationwide, those numbers actually have been hard to come by, I think, from my own personal experience until recently, and access is, I think, distinct from adoption. Access meaning, whether the service is even available in your area. Adoption meaning, of that available service, who's actually on it. So adoption is still a problem. I wouldn't say it's a problem, but it's still moving forward in both rural and non-rural areas. Rural is still significantly below non-rural at 50% versus 68% adoption. But then the other question is access. What sort of access what sort of services are even in the area? And I just have provided a link for folks to check out on their own. To the broadband map that was, I believe, started with the National Broadband Plan. It's a nice graphic that you can visit and click on, and you can see, what areas of the country are served by fiber, by cable, by DSL, by wireless. One thing I would mention when you view that map is once you click the wireless tab to see where wireless is available, it does look like most of the country is covered, but that's really deceptive because wireless, especially in a rural area, can be very unreliable due to geography. You're basically establishing an internet connection using cell phone towers, and as anyone who uses a cell phone knows, that reception is not as reliable as something like your landline or making a call over a cable or fiber network, voice over internet in that case. So customers still subscribe to landline. The lack of cellular service or high-speed voice over internet in rural areas, for example, is one reason why rural areas need to maintain a landline network at least for the foreseeable future. It has more reliable and accurate 911. But there are problems with a degraded landline network in rural areas. Recently, I think at the end of last year, a number of states complained to the FCC that they were unable to, customers were complaining of uncompleted calls to rural areas because of poor call quality. And this was attributed to the lack of maintenance or attention to the landline network. States that complained included Nebraska, Missouri, Minnesota, Michigan, Montana, South Carolina, and Wyoming. Rural subscribership complaints, subscriber complaints increased over 2,000% from April 2010 to March 2011. In this FCC proceeding, the FCC, after looking at the complaints, did clarify that it is unjust and unreasonable under the Communications Act for telecommunications providers to know that there is a degraded service problem and not to fix it. So what's interesting about that declaratory ruling for those states that complained was that traditionally those complaints could have been solved, I think, by the State Public Utility Commission. I think the reason why this might have been a problem that went straight to the FCC, which does not have the experience of states in solving service quality problems, is that the majority of those states that I mentioned had some sort of deregulation in place or in process. And what I mean by deregulation I will get to in a moment, but before that I want to mention what are the traditional regulations that have protected telecommunications customers. Well, for landline there's carrier of last resort, which basically is a prohibition against cherry picking. If a company refuses to serve a rural area because it's cost prohibitive for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, a state public utility commission can mandate service to that area based on the public interest and the necessity to connect those folks. PUCs have also traditionally dealt with service quality complaints. And the type of complaints that those few states were making to the FCC in that proceeding where the declaratory ruling was issued, I think in February this year. State PUCs have also regulated telecom rates to some extent. For example, while some rates may be competitive, they may set minimum standards for fair and reasonable local service rates for basic service that low-income customers use. But there's been a movement towards deregulation. Industry's been a part of that, and that is to weaken or eliminate those COLR protections, those protections against cherry picking. And so some state PUCs no longer have the ability, because of state legislation, to order that companies serve unserved areas that may be uneconomic for a company to serve on its own without a mandate. And that COLR has typically been a mandate for landline. There's a problem that it doesn't apply currently to broadband or high-speed internet, and actually is being proactively prohibited through proposed legislation in many states that are basically preventing state PUCs from, in the future, taking action for wireless or voice over internet customers. So if COLR doesn't apply, what does? Well, FCC expects that its voluntary Connect America Fund participants will build out to fill the gap in rural areas. But there's been less success than what I think FCC has hoped for. In fact, Verizon and AT&T recently turned down FCC's approval or offer of funding, $47.8 million for AT&T and $19.7 million for Verizon. AT&T wants to map out its own strategy. CenturyLink did accept $35 million in CAF funds, but it rejected the balance of $90 million that FCC offered. FCC offered a total of 90. They took $35 million. CenturyLink said the deployment requirements associated with the funding made it uneconomic. So that's what happens when you don't have COLR and the ability of regulators to sort of mandate service to areas that need it. So in quick summary, basically I just want to note that broadband is essential for enhancing the telecommunications network to everyone, including rural populations. State-level regulations and carrier of last resort provisions have, in fact, been effective in ensuring all segments of society are served. But COLR is disappearing from landline service, and it's not provided for wireless or voice over internet generally. Where private companies decline to extend to rural and low-income communities, communities may have to act independently and seek alternatives as possible. So that's just a quick overview of what's at stake here, why we need to, what the challenges are to funding rural areas, and what some of the legal impediments are to keep an eye out for.
Thank you, Darlene. And this is John, and I know we want to preserve our time for Jason and Edyael, so I'll keep this really short. I've been fielding some of the questions, and I'm just going to give you one, and then we'll save the rest of the time for our other speakers, and we'll take more questions after each speaker. But I did get a question about if you have any insight as to who the smaller percentages of folks that have the higher bit rates in the chart that you showed earlier, if you know who those people might be.
That's a really good question, and as I mentioned before, and until recently, at least I personally have not come across a lot of good statistics specifically for those rural areas. So that was sort of an overview. Those are sort of the numbers I have, and I myself would like a breakdown. But generally speaking, when you talk about who is more, palatable is not the word, but maybe who providers have tended to be more apt to spread broadband to in the rural areas. A lot of times there's second home communities or counties with large farms, and mountain and beachside communities, where you would see a lot of second homes and tourists. So that's not a real scientific answer, but I think that's the best one I have. And maybe Jason or Edyael can answer that.
Sounds like a great idea. And I think Edyael is up next. If you'd like to go ahead and join us now.
Sorry, everyone, I was mute. Okay, so can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So there you go. So hi, everyone. My name is Edyael Casaperalta. I am the coordinator for the Rural Broadband Policy Group, which is a national coalition of rural advocates from all sectors for high-speed, affordable, and reliable Internet service. And I work with the Center for Rural Strategies. So I wanted to talk with you today a little bit about some programs that you might be interested in applying, or you might have already applied for, that provide some funding, some federal funding for broadband infrastructure in rural communities. Some of the challenges that come with those programs, and the challenges in general for rural communities, and some policy opportunities that you might want to look out for to engage in this policy. So before we begin, I want you to keep two things in mind. One is that as as Darlene already mentioned, there's still a great need for broadband access in rural communities. And the unfortunate reality is that a lot of our rural and remote, native, and poor communities are actually outside of the market framework, right? So if we come up with solutions that try to incentivize the market, but these communities are outside of the market, we're already putting some roadblocks for our communities to be able to connect. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that these communities, because we are remote and we have less resources, we actually often know less about these programs and have less capacity to be able to apply for them. So while the intentions of our federal government and our state are to close the digital divide, the most remote communities are often the most overlooked and the ones that have least availability. So let's keep that in mind as we go. Those very cheerful facts. So first I want to talk to you about the universal service. So this is the principle that was introduced in 1936, essentially in the Communications Act, that recognized that in order for people to be part of our country, they needed to have access to communications services. And so taking this principle from 1936 onto the Telecommunications Act of 1996, that the FCC established, and then in 1997, what we are now know as the Universal Service Fund. And the fund was really then the infrastructure that would ensure the principle of universal service. So the government said, if we really want to connect everyone with communication services, then we must provide the infrastructure for this to be possible. So the USF was established in 1997, and here are some of the some of the reasons why it established. They wanted to promote the availability of quality services that were reasonable and affordable for all customers. So this is very important in today's policy issues and battles. So they wanted to promote this nationally, and they wanted to make sure that all consumers, including those in low-income, rural, insular, and high-cost areas, had access to these services at a reasonable rate, and that these services were comparable to the ones provided in urban areas. It also increased access to telecommunications in schools and libraries and rural healthcare facilities, and it ensured that in order to create this fund, this pot of money, then the companies that were using and providing the service would put in money into it, right? So essentially it's a tax for the companies that then they pass on to us as consumers. So we essentially all pitch into this pot of money that allows us all to be connected and have telecommunications services. So the Universal Service Fund is roughly around $8 billion annually. That's how much it collects. And if you take a look at your phone bills, you'll see USF, tax on your phone bill, whether it's phone or mobile. And some states have their own kind of state-focused Universal Service Fund. And the way they thought, okay, so we have these ideas, these principles that we want to cover. So how do we do that? USF is broken into 4 programs. One is the high cost, which is at the very top that you see, which high cost means that it supports the companies that have customers in rural or hard-to-serve areas. So these are the areas that are high cost for a company to provide service. So this chunk of the fund goes to those companies. Then there's also Lifeline, which is actually to provide discounts for basic local telephone service for low-income individuals. So if you live in a high-cost area, you're likely are also going to be receiving Lifeline services, Lifeline subsidy, and the subsidy actually doesn't go directly to you as a customer. It does go to the telephone provider that you have, and then they give you cheaper service, right? So say maybe $3 to $6 phone, basic telephone service, and that'll show up in your bill. The other focus that USF had is rural healthcare, and that was to support reduced rates for telecom and internet services to rural healthcare providers. And so, recognizing that these services are important for healthcare delivery and healthcare access, they needed to make sure that telephone and internet services are also available for healthcare institutions in rural areas. And this is specifically for rural areas. High cost and Lifeline are not only for rural. And then finally, the Schools and Libraries program, which is to provide discounts on telecom services to eligible schools and libraries. So a lot of our schools and libraries use what is also known as E-rate, which is the School and Libraries program, right? They get a subsidy to be able to get internet service and distribute it in their communities. So the reason why I highlight this is what the Universal Service Fund, how it was established in 1997 and how they decided they would distribute this pot of money, right? The most money really goes to the high-cost program. And given the restructuring of the Universal Service Fund last year, we went to a whole revamp of there were arguments about the fund not being administered well, and there was a lot of fraud, and there were redundant services provided. So it's so our federal government said, okay, we need to restructure it. And so the high cost, as you see it dotted in the orange line, as declared by the SEC last year, they decided that the high cost would become the Connect America Fund, because part of that restructuring is that USF was created with the idea of providing telephone service, but now, as Darlene mentioned, internet service has become such a vital part of our lives. So we need to be able to afford that service as well. It's kind of, it's an essential infrastructure for communities, and it's very much like a utility for consumers and for people in today's society. So high cost became the Connect America Fund. All the other programs are still present. So Connect America Fund now is broken into the legacy high cost, the fixed locations, and the mobility fund. And its main focus is to provide and extend not only broadband but voice services. So the Connect America Fund has been capped at $4.5 billion annually. In order to fulfill the ideas of the Connect America Fund, we can only tap as much as $4.5 billion. And here we're with a challenge, right? So so the idea is like we'll keep providing telephone service, but also extend this pot of money to provide wireless and fixed broadband services, and we'll transition this money out until we completely transition in 2018. And so the issue is that with Connect America Fund, only eligible telecommunications carriers can apply for those services. And if you are interested in applying, you need to be able to provide megabits per second that are 4 megabits upload and 1 megabit download. And the way that you determine which area is eligible for Connect America Fund is by census block. And the Connect America Fund also has a very explicit tribal support embedded into it. So that's a great portion of this fund. And the way that they're doing it is that they'll keep legacy high cost means that this is a pot of money that's essentially securing the voice service. Now, let's keep in mind this is not just basic telephone landline service. They are looking at, it's key that they say voice because it also includes voice over internet protocol. So essentially, they'll be comfortable if voice services are provided over the internet, not only landline. So the first phase actually of the Connect America Fund has already been released. There will be distributed money for fixed location connectivity and mobile connectivity. So the fixed locations, there's already phase 1 is underway, and that is to disburse $300 million to extend service to unserved communities. And this is what Darlene mentioned earlier. since only eligible telecommunications carriers are the ones that can apply for this money, that means that only the telephone companies or internet companies that are already receiving money are the only ones that can receive it. So these $300 million of phase one have been put out for these companies to receive, right? So essentially we're going to improve things by doing what we've been doing forever. And a lot of these companies are not interested in providing or expanding voice service, even if it's landline. They're actually interested in not providing voice service in a lot of these remote communities. So Verizon and AT&T turned down, the collective $60+ million that were offered to them. And then for 6 locations, phase 2 will be ongoing support to maintain high costs. For the mobility fund as well, this will be so this has, the Connect America Fund has actually an explicit mobile broadband and voice service component. And it will also be, $300 million that go to unserved communities. And this is important for you to know that the way that this money will be distributed is by reverse auction, which means that the company that says, I will provide this service for less money will get the grant. So that presents a challenge because if you're a small provider, you probably can't afford to say that you'll provide a service for less money than you have. So larger companies that have more resources will be able to take advantage of this fund simply because they'll have the resources and the capital to be able to down pay or to decrease their costs. What is good also about what is a light in the mobility fund is that there's a guaranteed $50 million tribal mobility fund for phase 1, and so there is at least $50 million committed to tribal projects. And for mobility fund phase 2, it's also it'll go up to $500 million for ongoing support annually, and it guarantees $100 million for tribal projects as well.
Hi, Edyael. It's Darlene. I just wanted to let you know we need to wrap up your section in a couple of minutes and move on to Jason.
I do actually have, Edyael, this is John. I received a question. Maybe that would be a good way to wrap up. A question specifically, if you're a community organizer or someone else working in this area and you've not previously sort of worked on these issues, who should you reach out to? How is it best to become involved?
Oh, I'll leave up a slide with my information, and I also have links on this slide at the very bottom for more information and details on this programs if you're interested. But I'm more than willing to talk. I love to talk with people about more in detail about this. So let me wrap up in a minute. So there's also other programs like the Community Connect grants, which is for people for population of less than 20,000, and this is actually open for non-eligible telecommunications carriers. So it does include nonprofits, co-ops, tribal organizations, municipalities, etc. There's also, in 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act disbursed specifically $2.5 billion for rural broadband deployment. And so here's where we come with some of the challenges, as I mentioned. A lot of these programs, if you're not an eligible telecommunications carrier, it's hard. You won't be able to apply. The applications are very cumbersome. And sometimes your area may already be marked as being first because it's used by census blocks, so you can't apply. Or maybe you submit an application and a telecom provider says, we already provide services, so your application is booted out. And also, there's many bills that are preventing local municipalities and communities from building their own networks. So that's where the policy opportunities come from. Even though we have a lot of federal and state programs, there's still a lot of need. Currently, we can keep an eye on the Farm Bill. There's an amendment from known as the Warner Amendment that was trying to create more funds New York Senator Kristen Gillibrand also was trying to introduce a bill that would create more funding. But we also have to be wary in terms of policy advocacy about, what states have anti-community network bills, and what states are promoting telephone and broadband deregulation bills. Another thing I want to flag for people is that the rural health care portion of the Universal Service Fund is open for comments. It is requesting comments about how to disperse this money and how to transition this money, and the comments are due August 23rd. So if you're interested, you're a healthcare provider, you're interested in looking into that, I'd love to talk to you. Here's my contact information, and I try to pack up a lot of information into it. I can make the slides available with the links to more detail about these programs. But know that the Broadband Policy Group is interested in creating policy ways, opportunities for people to be able to receive these funds. And one of our major hurdles is to get the FCC to expand the definition of eligible telecommunications carriers so that our smaller communities and providers can take advantage of those funds. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think we're going to have to leave it at that for questions for Edyael right this minute. We will have an opportunity, hopefully after Jason, to take questions for everyone. But with that, with our time being short, let's move straight on to Jason.
Sure. First of all, thank you to everybody at the NCLF for putting on this webinar and for inviting us to participate. And then second, I think to kind of second the other presenters' comments, for those of you that are in unconnected areas or working in unconnected areas, we are very much a fraternity of people left behind, and as such, I think there's a tremendous amount of support and collaboration, and definitely feel free to pick up the phone. And I think you can call companies, you can call states, you can call programs, and we're all pretty much willing to support each other because we're all in this together, even though we're in different parts of the country. And I think that's my first takeaway, is definitely ask questions and call people. The second big takeaway is to find champions. As it's been mentioned, there's a lot of efforts to limit community broadband and limit states' efforts to build out. Finding champions is crucial, particularly political champions. In Massachusetts, we are very fortunate to have the support of our governor, who created the Broadband Institute and gave us a very simple mission to find the unconnected areas of our state and to build out to them. That's what we are doing. We are currently building a 1,300-mile fiber network that's going to connect 123 mostly rural communities in the western part of our state. And another takeaway is connecting anchor institutions. We are connecting 1,300 anchor institutions, schools, libraries, town halls with fiber. And we think that's an important part of creating outposts in rural areas. And so as you design networks or think about networks, that's something to think about. The third takeaway is, as you start these projects, define what your goals are. We know, I think it's already been mentioned, I'm going to skip through this, but there's about 11 million of us who are unconnected. The National Broadband Map is a tremendous source of data. If you haven't already used it, use it, and you can drill down. Each state, each of the 50 states and 56 territories has a state broadband initiative mapping project, and if you're not part of that, you should call them. They can help you get information on the level of connectivity or unconnectivity in your area, and you want to put together as much information as you can, and that's a great place to start. In Massachusetts, this is our map. Your state should have a very similar map, and you can see the western part of the state is where we're building our network is largely unserved. And then you're going to want to drill down. These are our rural areas. The federal government defines our rural areas, 20,000 people. Most of these towns simply have a couple hundred households each. And then drilling down even further, if you can map where your households are, that can really help getting champions on board, which helps get funding and helps you get projects going. I think I can skip through this, but this is an example of a telephone pole in a really served community. There's multiple cable operators. There's a lot going on. You get into rural areas. If you live in a rural area, your pole might look something like this. This pole was actually installed in 1927 I think that kind of speaks to the level of deferred maintenance and lack of investment in our communities. And actually, if you look at the little red arrow, you can see that this home is getting services by a satellite dish, and just the impact on consumers. In Alston, which is a neighborhood in Boston, very dense, people are able to get 75 megabit service for about $90 a month. In Mount Washington, where that photo that I just showed you was taken, for the same price, you're getting 2 megabits. There's a tremendous disparity. And the third takeaway, or the next takeaway, is that the reason we're unconnected, it's really an economic issue. Density creates revenues. Revenues create investments or support investments. In order to make up for that, we need to change the economics, and it really does require some kind of subsidy, whether it's the Connect America Fund or some other source of funding. So once you've defined your goals and what you want to, where you need to build, there are a limited number of technologies that you can use. Each of our areas has different challenges. Arizona has tremendous heat, which is not good for electronics. Alaska gets very, very cold, which is also not good for electronics. In Massachusetts, wireless doesn't work very well because we have rolling hills and a lot of trees. So as you're making decisions about what you want to invest in, investing in the right technology, and it may take multiple technologies, you really do need to look at this with an open mind, and you want to make sure that what you're investing in is solving your problem, not just for the short term, but for the long term. Your challenges, again, cost is a huge, huge issue. A lot of areas have aggressive incumbent providers who may not want to invest and solve your problem, but they don't want you to either. Don't initially look at that as a threat. I think it's good to try and work with people and build as big a collaboration and big a tent as you can, and always try and be positive and welcoming. Your other big challenge is going to be rights of way, getting on poles or getting in conduit. That is the single hardest and most expensive part of bringing broadband to your unconnected areas. It is very, very time-consuming. It is very expensive, and it is very challenging. And there's not a lot of ways to get around that. So that's something to keep in mind. And then as you're looking at your rural areas, how you treat people in a community, how you work to put in place policies that will prevent cherry picking will directly tie into your community support. An example of this is we have a very small town, just a couple hundred households, and they actually are building their own fiber to the home network. They made a decision to build fiber to the home to every single home, and as a result, the entire town, over 90% of the people voted to fund it with town funds, and it was that decision that that led to that success. Some sample costs, and I'll go through these pretty quick, but I think they're going to make the slides available so you can get these. These fluctuate everywhere, but on average, we see $50,000 a mile. In our project, we have 32,000 poles. So the $500 a pole, that adds up pretty quickly, about $16 million. If you have to put in new poles, like that 1927 pole, it's going to cost you around $1,500. Here's an example of what putting conduit is. Again, this costs about $300,000 a mile. If you can build collaborations, this is a collaboration we did with an intelligent transportation system. It reduced that cost down to $80,000. So if you look around your state and you can find partnerships and collaborations with other projects, that can help you save money. This is a spool of fiber. It's about $1 a foot or $1.50 to install. This is what we're putting in each of the 1,300 anchor institutions, and that's about $1,500. It's a little bit more if it's a more difficult build. This is a optical networking terminal. These change, and technology is changing all the time. These get fancier every day, but that's what one looks like. This is a huge issue because you got to figure out who's going to pay for that. Small providers have a challenge in that if you're charging somebody $50 to $75 a month for broadband and you have to put up front capital costs for the CPE, that creates a real cash flow problem. This is a wireless tower. Costs about $20,000 to install. We have WISPs, wireless internet service providers. They can put those up themselves. This is a wireless access point. This goes on a house. This is what, from the tower, you beam down to people's homes. This costs on average about $500, also part of the customer premise equipment. I think we already talked about a lot of the funding, so I can skip through some of this. Looking to find innovative ways is really, really important. Very few of you are going to have the ability just to write a check, but if you can partner with smart grids like Chattanooga, if you can overlap to existing fiber, if you have people in your community that have expertise like engineers or lawyers, all of these things are ways that you can save money. This is a photo of overlashing. And then policy tools. If there's things you can do that can also help reduce costs, like getting assets. I think Arizona and Utah, the President's executive order, all made assets available. These are great things which help reduce costs. Also, aggregating customer demand. If you have 100 people that live in your community and you can get all 100 of them to say that they will sign up, that's going to be far more attractive to a provider than if they have 30 or 40 people signed up. And that also ties directly into broadband adoption, which is a whole other issue. Steps in building your network. We talked about planning. What is it that you want to do? Building a team, getting your champions, consultants, finding great people to help you, getting an initial sense of what you want to build, how much it's going to cost you. You're going to need that in order to go get the funding, do your applications, permits in the rights of way, building relationships with utilities and the pole owners is very, very important. When you get all of that squared away, you're going to go into construction. The make-ready is going to be the biggest part of that, again, putting in the infrastructure. And then once that's in place, you're going to be able to do testing and acceptance, and then on to operations. Key things. Do not just focus on building your network. You need to focus on sustaining your network. A lot of the BTOP projects, they built networks that might not be sustainable. If you give away dark fiber, if you do things that just to get the network built, if you make bad deals, that's going to hurt you in the end because it's going to undermine the viability of your network. I went through all of this pretty quickly, but here's my contact information. These slides I think are going to be made available. And again, feel free to call or email anytime. And I think, again, it's a very supportive community. We all want to get America connected. And thanks for the call, and looking forward to questions.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
John, I think I saw from you that you had a couple of questions for Jason.
We have received a few questions, a couple of which I think would probably be directly to Jason, and some of which everybody else might be able to jump in as well. So I'll just roll through a few of those. I got a question regarding an organization that's petitioning the FCC for ETC designation.
Yep.
And wanted to know if you had any tips, if there were any ideas of what they might do. And I know that was something that Edyael also raised as a policy issue, so maybe both of you could address that.
So Edyael may be able to back me up on this, but I believe that designation is actually at the state level. So with your state regulatory, whether it's a PUC or Department of Telecommunications and Cable. And again, I think what she had put in her slides about being a provider, and I think there's more information we can probably get that detail the steps for whoever asked that question.
And I'll add that they've actually clarified this is for a tribe, and since it's a tribe, they don't deal with the state; they deal directly with the FCC.
Oh, okay.
I would, yeah, I think on one of the slides I had like the address for the USAC webpage, and there I saw that if you wanted, tribes have a different process, and they detail the process there to become an eligible project. But if it's a non-tribe, you have to petition your state. So I'm sorry I can't give more details, but I know there's more information on the site.
Wonderful. And I know we've received a question about this. Everyone will know the presentation will be available afterwards, and all of you who are on will be sending you information about that, both the PowerPoints and the presentation itself, so you'll be able to get a hold of those. Thank you both.
And this is Darlene. I wanted to, I had an idea for the audience poll where a significant number of people answered other to the question of, if you're an organization or an individual who has applied for funding, please identify the nature of your work or organization. And many people did, I think 26% did not fall under A through D, which was school, library, private organization, so on and so on. I see from one of our comments in our chat box or our question box that someone noted that other for them meant tribal. So I would ask if folks who answered other could take the opportunity and in your question, your Q&A box, if you could type, other and what type of organization or work you do, that could be very helpful for us to know who is interested in this topic. So this is a question to our audience and asking for a little feedback for those who can take a look at your question box and let us know what you mean by other organizations, since there's a significant number of you who are out there. I really appreciate that.
Great.
The other thing I wanted to, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that another a couple of questions that have come in, I'm going to sort of mold together into a question that I think might be a good one to sum up on. I know we're running out of time. And as this is part of our rural investment webinar series, some questions have come in about the collaborative nature of the funding that you discussed, Jason, and sort of innovation in this area. And I think everyone's discussed both the private and public investment in this effort. And I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about whether or not we're headed in the right direction in terms of investment in this area, and what we could do to ensure that there's real investment both from public sources, federally, state, and also from private entities in this.
Sure. I mean, I think, again, the biggest thing is to get our voices together as one. Certainly the Connect America Fund has a great deal of promise for all of us. And instead of being separate voices in individual states, again, I think coming together to make sure that this funding is useful to us as it possibly can be, rather than having other people like in Washington or wherever dictate how it's going to be used, I think is really an important and timely step.
I would say that it's really important to become engaged in this policy issues because, even with the proposed or the request for comments on the rural telehealth program, if we are not submitting comments to the FCC telling them what our ideas are, what our solutions from rural and remote communities are, how we believe they could be most helpful in distributing this money, it will be other entities that might not know our challenges, that possibly don't know our challenges and opportunities and ideas. And also I think it's unfortunate that a lot of our focus has gone to incumbent providers because I personally feel like we are trying to present solutions by doing the same old thing, and that's why I believe it's important to become part of these policy conversations, to say what you're doing is not working, and we have some solutions, but we're being blocked by policy. We need to present some policy solutions ourselves.
Thanks, Edyael. And Jessica, I think, are we about ready? Are we about out of time at this point?
Yes, Darlene, just wanted to wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody. For more information on the rights of individual and community access to broadband and other telecommunications, look at these NCLC books. We have access to utility service for attorneys and the rights of utility consumers for consumers. So if you're interested in those books, you can visit our bookstore at nclc.org. We have another webinar in this series. It's going to be on August the 14th at 1 p.m. with Don Mackey. It's on sustainable rural development funding, lessons from the field, and everyone will get an invite for that to register, just like you did for this webinar. And please do the evaluation for us when you sign out. Just exit out and it will pop up. And tomorrow I'll email you a link where you can access the PowerPoint and the recording. And thank you so much to our speakers today.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks to everyone for joining us.